All right. Well, welcome back to Menders. Today I've got Carley Trotman. And Carley, you're the founder of the CarTam Project. You're a communication strategist, a cake lover, soon to be expat in the south of France. And I'm extraordinarily jealous. And I am just so delighted because you have a wealth of experience working with healthcare organizations on organizational communication and messaging. And that is really what we're talking about today. So thank you for being
Thank you
here.
so much for having me.
Yeah. So I'd love to just kind of get into this. Can you tell me about what you do?
Yeah, so I started my company a couple months ago, leveraging all the good and bad experiences that I've had being an internal communications specialist, employee engagement point person for organization. Because I've had my own personal frustrations in the workplace, but I've seen firsthand how other people experience frustrations in the workplace. And I think companies have an opportunity right now with all that's going on in the world to really think about their internal customer in the way that they've traditionally looked at their external customers and creating an experience that they can have coming to work through their messaging, which isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do when you're focusing on all the other day to day things of running a business.
Oh, I love that. So, can you just share a little bit more about that? Honestly, hearing that, I just got really excited because that's what I want as an employee. I want to have an experience that demonstrates that I'm cared about, valued, and heard. So, so what does that look like to start to focus on organizations creating an experience that's focused on their internal customer or their employees?
It's it's a lot of different things. And I think where I'm starting to see opportunities in this space primarily is how the employee journey looks, what it looks like from a different organization perspective. I think as people are in business and they create products and services to sell, they understand what their customer journey is. At the acquisition, you bring them in, how you keep them happy and have repeat customers. But what if we apply that same kind of thinking and thought process to the employee that you have, like if your recruiting efforts before they come into the door? What does that look like? How do you talk about yourself as employer of choice in the marketplace? How are you differentiating what your product is, which is your business, your company, your employee experience from different competitors so that if you're interviewing different candidates, they are, you hear it all the time. When you're interviewing, you're supposed to interview the company. What are you saying? What are you putting out there to get people excited to come work for you? And I see that there's a big opportunity to connect before they come into the door for the interview to when they get their offer letter, they sign it. Their first day at work is one of those milestones in an employee's life cycle that you don't really hear a lot about, right? You get your first year anniversary, you're there for the 10 to 15 to 20 years, then you get to retirement. And unfortunately, some people do go through like getting laid off or getting fired, so their severance package. But I feel like that first day of work is almost underplayed in the employee journey when one of my first experiences is that the laptop one of the employers I signed on to work for didn't come with a charger. So if you think about what that experience was like and you're trying to be flexible, you're trying to be understanding, but in the background, like I'm meant to show up for onboarding meetings, I'm meant to show up for training. I've got no power source to my laptop because what they sent didn't match. And I'm a pretty tech savvy person. Like I've been an office manager where I've had to set up people's workspaces. So I know what the ports look like. I know what to put plugs. But I sent a picture and I was like, look, all the ports on the laptop don't match the connections for the plug that you were sent. And they had to say, well, we sent you the wrong thing. And I found that as an interesting experience because I've never had that happen before. But I realized that that was something that was overlooked as part of the employee experience. I mean, they're different things, but that's just a personal example.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And honestly, what came up for me was my own experience hiring in healthcare organizations. I would say, honestly, the focus tends to be more on having the applicant or even the new employee who has just started with the team like demonstrate their value and prove that they deserve to be there. And there's often not a lot of attention or even willingness to do that recruitment, which to me feels really short sighted and a little bit ridiculous because. Because applicants have so many options at this point that they really can choose to go anywhere. And so if we're not willing to like highlight who we are and also see them as whole people,
Yes.
there's no reason for them to come. And I've seen on committees that I've been on, hiring committees, that people have said no after this probably less than pleasant experience with the hiring committee.
Yeah. And it's frustrating because it almost like you want them to demonstrate the value of what they can bring, but you're missing an opportunity, and I'm going to say missed opportunities a lot because of it's you're building something as a company. You're in service for a reason. Yes, profit is the bottom line, but this company was started for a reason to solve a problem, and you can't solve that problem by yourself. If you are recruiting people in different skills and different facets to come into your business to help you to continually solve this problem, innovate, grow, get better at solving the problem, it shouldn't just be what value are they bringing, but what can you do to help them be the best version of themselves while they're spending 8+ hours at work. I mean, we spend a lot of time at our jobs, at our desks, like in service of exchanging time, brain power, effort for money. Like let's be real about that, right? Like we need to work, and it's a missed opportunity. And it's just this one-sided, and I'm going to say transactional in this instance, of just bringing people in and not really understanding the value of that two-way relationship that you can.
Yeah. So you're probably aware that in healthcare, burnout rates are really high and turnover rates, or at least turnover intention, is also extraordinarily high. I think actual turnover is like 25%, but depending on the discipline, I think people are saying like maybe it's nursing, like up to 60% of nurses are considering leaving. So, I mean, how do you see like internal messaging and communication as being particularly important to these healthcare organizations who are really struggling to keep their staff?
So I think healthcare is an interesting industry because it's in the business of life and death, right? Like you've got hospitals, you've got hospice care, you've got different facets of the healthcare function that is in a 24/7, always operating sort of structure from a hospital perspective. And it can't close. It doesn't take days off. It doesn't close. So I'm not surprised that the turnover rate for employees in those 24/7 type operations is so high because you're constantly on. You don't have the benefit of the downtime. The hours to serve patients and be available is a lot different from somebody that like stays in advertising or accounting because, you can take a vacation or you can have your office is going to close. Hospitals don't have that luxury. And I think when you have people or employees that are servicing patients in a way that, if you don't show up for work, that's one less nurse, that's one less doctor that's going to be available to possibly save somebody's life. And I'm going to be biased because I've spent a lot of time supporting healthcare organizations, but I feel like you need to give them extra level care and attention because of just how on they have to be all the time. And I've worked in hospitals and I'm a super sensitive person. And the emotional connection that you get to your patients, the you kind I don't want to say you have to turn off or desensitize yourself. You're around a lot of sickness. You're around a lot of families that are crying, and it's not always good situations. And to show up to work and know that you have a job to do and you want to be there to do that job, but you don't have that support from your leadership or your organization to understand that what you're up against on a 24/7, 12-hour shift, 3, 4 days a week, and they just don't care. They just want you there. Of course, you're going to check out. You don't feel supported. And from a communication perspective, I think it's necessary to understand one, the environment that they're working in and be aware of who is in that environment. I think they're charge nurses, you got chief doctors that they kind of engage with on a day-to-day basis. But from a leadership perspective, do you understand what that environment looks like? Do you understand the opportunities that they have to talk to their leader, their charge nurse or chief doctor? Are there opportunities that they get to understand what's going on in that institution and how their role and them showing up to work is contributing to the success and the innovation and the productivity of delivering the patient care, delivering the solutions to help somebody? And I mean, this can happen in any industry where you're just head down doing it on a day to like you're at work doing it on a day-to-day basis. But I think leaders have a responsibility to make sure that when they're running the business, they bring people along for that journey of how their role is contributing to the success and progression of that business. And communications is the way to do. I mean, there are different ways to do that, but I'm a communications person. That's my perspective. That's what I love and I understand. And connecting through messages is an important way to do that.
Yeah. So I think that is so powerful. Can you give an example of what it looks like when that connection through messaging is really working well, is effective within a healthcare system between leaders and the frontline staff?
When you say give an example, do you mean from me personally or how that can look like in a specific situation? Because my brain just went to a couple different examples.
I'd love to hear any examples. What you've seen, what you've experienced, what you might advise organizations to consider.
So I think if we look at COVID as it's ongoing situation and the needs of hospitals, clinics just having to be on all the time. You saw nurses just show up for work day in, day out, hour after hour. And I remember some visuals of like the masks that they wore just left these impressions on their face. I saw some videos where parents would come home and they'd have to like take off all of the clothing. They couldn't hug their kids before like they got everything off. And to have to do that day in and day out and not get compensated appropriately. There was no messaging around, we're all going through this and this is kind of where we are from the organization. And people would just quit. And they would quit and they go to travel nurse and get compensated. And we're like, well, you weren't valuing me when I was a full-time employee. As soon as I left and I did something else, now I'm kind of in a different position. I feel like the numbers, the finance and the accounting part to pay for it is one thing. But not being able to communicate with your frontline workers to say, we know what you're up against. We see it day in, day out. We want you to be with your families. We're not with them as well. Like you're in a stressful situation. Just being able to say, this is what we're trying to do. These are some of the solutions that we want to put forward to make this better. I felt like was just not done at all. And I think that is a challenge that every organization has is understanding the level of transparency with their messaging and what's going on from a business perspective that I don't know if they're scared to be transparent or they don't care to be transparent. I'm seeing it in different ways. But there's something about authenticity and transparency at the organization level that you feed into your messaging to make sure that your people understand we're in a bad place right now. But these are the things that we're working on to get us to weather the storm. And that is what doesn't often happen, especially in healthcare organizations, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what I tend to see is communication gets maybe oversimplified and overly positive. And so they give out a really slim message. And it, you know, honestly, to be blunt, people just read that as BS. Like they don't believe it. And I think for good reason.
what they're seeing on a day-to-day basis. So if the sky is gray and the weatherman is telling you we've got sunny days ahead, and for 14 days straight it's like a torrential downpour, you're like, really? Like, that's the no. Like, yeah, you can't. And I understand the sensitivity of wanting to admit that things are bad. Don't get me wrong. I completely understand that because you want to avoid fear, you want to avoid panic, you want to avoid aggression, like you want to avoid the negative feelings that come with the situation. But I think you have a responsibility to acknowledge the truth of the matter and ac- acknowledge it, but not harp on it in a way that you're reinforcing that this is so bad. Things are just not good. But you, and this is where communication comes in. Work with somebody that knows how to cushion that message. Be transparent upfront. We know things are bad right now. And then your positive messaging comes in with these are all the things that we're trying to do. Because when people see that there is effort being made, that changes their perspective on what's going on.
Yeah, it does seem like you get a lot of trust when you're willing to acknowledge the reality and you're also willing to say, and these are the things that we're doing to try to take care of you.
Yeah.
And when they're real, tangible things, like that does feel good. And they might not be enough, but it still feels like someone
Yeah.
cares and has your back.
And I equate it
So,
to bringing people along for the journey. My background is also kind of in change management where, we work with organizations that are going through a change to help their people like navigate the change because it's not the organization that does the change, it's the people. Like you'll have a directive from leadership or something in the market that's prompting to you to do think differently. But if you can't get your people on board, the change is not going to be realized. And I think that's one of the misconceptions with change management is that you have to get the organization to change, you have to get the people to change. And part of getting people to change is bringing them along for the journey from the beginning. Don't wait until 2 days before the change is supposed to happen. You send an email like, oh, my job's done. I told you all about it. No, that's not how that works.
yeah. Yeah, I've seen the 5 o'clock emails on a Friday night with the change starting like
Aren't those wonderful?
2 weeks
I'm
later.
going to happy hour and you're telling me about this big thing that's big. Look,
Yeah, guess what? You're not going to have your day off. Your caregiving plan for your child is totally disrupted. So good luck with that.
yep.
Yeah, so how do you encourage healthcare leaders, and as you know, this is part of our Women in Leadership season, and specifically thinking about women leaders. How do you encourage those leaders to connect with their staff and have these conversations? And I will say what I see is sometimes leadership can think of communication as very top down. Let me give you information in a very distributive way. Like I'm going to send that email or that mass email, or I'm going to write the newsletter. But to me, that is missing. Like you're not really engaging your
Yeah.
staff. So, what do you recommend?
I recommend thinking about that word you just said, engagement. What does that look like? And that almost always comes down to having two-way communication. The message has to go and you have to get feedback from that message. And that could be anything from having a town hall once a quarter. It could be a CEO coffee chat series. Depending on, and I say it can be anything because it really depends on the size of your organization and where people sit. If you have a really global organization, then you have to think about reaching your audiences in different time zones and different languages, which is a whole other kind of thing to consider. But working with your key people, whether it's communications, whether it's change, which is whatever department is kind of owning this communication function, to understand how to build a two-way communication. You want to send a message, but you want to be able to get the feedback from that. And then I would also recommend engaging your people managers because they're the ones that spend a lot of time with their employees on a day-to-day business in the trenches doing the work. And they still have that leader perspective that leader hat on of how do we drive the business forward. And while they are also employees and people too, they have that layer of insight into leadership and can understand what the priorities are for the business that a frontline person might not be able to understand or have. So I think those two things I would recommend from my experience have been successful in building engagement, making sure that you have channels that people can talk back to you. You can capture their feedback. And then one third thing I probably would highlight is when you create the channel for two-way engagement, when you start to engage the people leaders, have a plan to communicate out progress on the feedback that you've gotten. Don't just take the feedback and stuff it somewhere or do it and then not tell anybody that you've done the thing, right? I'm not saying brag about it, but let people know that, hey, I heard you. This is what you said. We've decided to kind of focus on improving or implementing or doing this thing, and let people know that you've done that. Because I think to any relationship, especially if we spend a lot of time at work, if what we're putting out is received in a positive way, even if it's not received in a positive, if what we're putting out is received and we can get feedback on what we put out as to, hey, this is great, or this, we can't focus on this right now for XYZ reasons, we feel even more committed to know that what we're working on, our value and our impact are being seen and heard.
Hmm. Yeah, to me, that's like it's highlighting values sharing because you're honoring what your employee is saying is important, and you're communicating like we value this too, whether or not you're able to take those actions.
Yeah, I think that's critical for any kind of relationship, but especially from a working relationship where, as an employee, you've signed on to contribute to a mission of an organization. Like, you see the value, you see the purpose, and you think that the time spent from 8 to 6, 9 to 7, however long, wherever you want to do it from, is worth your time and effort. It's worth the time away from doing something else because you can see the value, you can see what it's going to be able to produce or create in a positive way. You want to know that it's your effort is not for nothing.
Yeah. So, how do you help healthcare leaders see that this effort to have two-way communication is worth it? Because I guess what I have occasionally heard is that people want the information. They want to get feedback, but sometimes it feels much simpler and more time effective to just send out a survey. And then they get frustrated because nobody responds to the survey. And I mean, for me, I see that as a breakdown in relationship. Like, why would anyone respond to your survey if you didn't take the time to engage them first?
Exactly, because they don't know why. Two things that people typically don't respond to, sir. One, they think it's not anonymous. Like, their email is going to get tracked and whatever they put in there is going to be looked at negatively and they're going to be reprimanded. So, of course, that's already putting up a barrier or that two-way communication. Like, people don't feel comfortable sharing their opinion. And then it's often done in a way that reactive. Oh my God, we had this thing happen. Let's get a survey out just to see what people think. It's not built into the culture of, we care about what you think. We want to know. We can't reach all of you by picking up the phone and calling you. So we're going to send a survey. Like, it's not messaged appropriately. So I think what healthcare leaders can do, again, is engage their people managers to understand, where are your people working? What tools do they have access? Because again, not everybody has access to an email or computer to sit down and complete a survey. So do you rely on only getting their feedback through a survey? Because it's convenient, that's another thing. Like, you send out a survey and 30% of your employee population doesn't have access to computer to sit, complete it. What kind of response rate do you think you're going to get? So you have to know where your people are, what their work environment looks like, what they have access to. And if you don't know, then you should find out. Like, hit the ground, start talking to people, ask questions, and figure out ways of building the engagement. Like what you said, if you're not engaging them, they're not going to feel like the to give their feedback and input is really.
Yeah. So how do you see on the ground communication or, leaders doing leadership rounds, being on the ground, walking the clinic? How do you see that kind of work as fitting in with overall communication strategy for a healthcare organization?
I think it's critical. And I'm mindful and sensitive to the size of the organization. I don't have any expectation that a hospital director is going to be able to walk around to every satellite location or every clinic. I don't think that that's realistic. But if once a quarter, like you work with your communications team to say, okay, what are the people facing opportunities that we have where I can be on site and have 45 minutes of a coffee chat in a space where people can come up, meet, I can meet them, we can have conversations, ask, like, even send out questions that ask ahead of time to provide questions. Create the opportunities if they're not already there, because you can't just rely on, well, I don't know how to get to people. Then I get you have a missed opportunity as a leader, and I don't think you're holding up your end of responsibility for growing the organization and making sure that the product that you're putting out is the best that you can be if you can't take the time to identify ways to connect with your people.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm so appreciating what you're sharing, and it's really interesting to me because I think messaging is just often thought of as what is written in black and white and not like the interactions that are happening live
Yeah.
between leadership and people.
And I think what's missing from that too is when you write messages, there's tone of how the message is written. There is context. There's so many nuances just from a messaging framework standpoint of, what are you trying to what are you communicating to inform and understand? Are you communicating to engage and spur action? Those are two very different things, and you're not going to message something the same way to get the reaction or, for the purpose of those two assets.
So um, how do you help senior leaders communicate with their people managers in such a way so that the messaging is consistent and so that the different levels of leadership are able to, I guess, consistently share these values and communicate in a way that that's just effective, that really honors the deeply held values of the organization and the employees that it's trying to keep.
That happens in a couple different ways, right? So the same way we talk about building two-way communication with employees and leadership, that kind of starts to funnel through the different layers of leadership as well. I don't expect you to just have one-way communication with your people leaders, but also I think organizations should build in strategy, like vision focus sort of touch points where, once a quarter, once a month, however long it made sense to have meetings of leadership to talk about where are we taking this organization, what challenges we're up against, or opportunities we can kind of take on together. And from those conversations, create a list of talking points. Like, this is what we agreed on as the leaders of this organization. And through the two-way channels with the people leaders, you start to funnel down those messages. So it's not only just coming from the top, but now we have this collective, holistic understanding of what we're doing as an organization. How do we get people on board and build in those talking points progressively through the touch points? So it's not just bam, here's another email, a recap of what we just did. You have to weave it into the culture so it's on a day-to-day assimilation or absorption into what you're doing.
Wow. So it really comes down to those like day to day, minute by minute interactions
Yeah.
and making sure that that two-way communication is happening so consistently so that those messages are not just being given directively, but like being absorbed and modeled and learned
Yep.
by your people.
Day to day. I think I'm a big proponent of doing things progressively and measuring as you go. Like I'm naturally risk averse and I kind of want to pressure test everything before I just full scale jump in. I mean, I'm going to take flight at some point, but I want to make sure that as I'm building my parachute on the way down, like my bag at least has the equipment in it. I like slashing things out of leaves and debris in the air. Like,
Yeah, don't leave it to chance. That sounds terrifying. So what does that look like on a practical level? Like how do you think how do you think healthcare leaders can build that parachute or have like get that feedback? Is that just in-person communication or what works best?
I don't think there is this is the thing that works best, right? You have to be willing to try things, test them, and see what works for your organization and the culture that is has developed within that institution. Because not everything works. It's not like a one size fits all. And I think it's a willingness to try different things, right? If you write a message or if you decide, we're gonna come up with a newsletter and we're gonna write a bunch of things to this first iteration, you put it out, have a way to track how the newsletter performs, whether you post it on SharePoint and drive a link to it so people can go click on. If you just rely on sending a newsletter and it's just in the email, I have concerns because how are people referring back to this email? Do you want them to engage on the things you put in the email? Or are you just sending out an email for the sake of sending out an email as a newsletter? Very concerning to me. And you test how it performed consistently and build that into the strategy and planning of whatever your business unit looks like so that you understand, okay, in January, we had all these things we wanted to say. We had 50 people click on this thing. And then for 3 months, engagement or clicks either went down or they went up. Have a benchmark so that you know this is at least what we started with. It's getting better or it's gotten worse. If it's getting better, keep doing it, make tweaks to see how much better you can get. If it's gotten worse, gradually pull something back, try different things, and then test them again so that you know, okay, this didn't work well in the beginning. We tried something else, it got better or it got worse. Just be comfortable with you're not going to get it right off the bat. And that's okay. You don't have to get it right off the bat, but you have to be willing to try different things of reaching people and seeing what works.
So you're really recommending a pretty diverse strategy in terms of different ways to reach people,
Mhm.
to communicate, and also to observe how are people responding, through the email, through the in-person communication, through the town hall, whatever it happens to be. Like using a more robust toolkit is going to get you more
Yep,
information and you're going to figure out are they responding in a way that's useful for us or
exactly.
not is what we're trying working.
Yep. Mhm.
Yeah. Mm. So when organizations have, well, let me change my question actually. So one of the things that I see is a kind of like sometimes senior leaders look at their people managers as being the problem. And so you maybe have heard this before. I've definitely heard this. I was in a big organizational meeting for a regional healthcare system recently, and they basically said, like, we've just got to figure out how to get our managers to do a better job at communicating and helping take care of their people so that their people stay. And I know. And so in the moment, my response was like, this is crazy. Because what I was seeing was that the people around the table were not necessarily thinking about or speaking about the employees in a way that convinced me that they knew how to keep their people or take care of them. So, I mean, what do you make of that kind of challenge when maybe people or leaders who, don't necessarily have the insight to recognize that their messaging isn't hitting home, that it's really not the problem down the line, that it starts with them?
I have a lot of thoughts on that. First one being, no one is ever trained how to be a manager, right? You get promoted for doing great work, but You get the promotion, but you don't get the training and tools to support you in doing the work that comes with a manager, right? You kind of have to figure it out through trial and error. If I have a leader who's telling me that their people managers aren't getting the job they need to do a better job with messaging. I'm going to ask them, what have you given them that's contributing to the job and the performance that they're doing from a communication standpoint? And I wait to see what that response is. Because if you're not giving them the tools to communicate the thing of how it should be communicated, then what do you expect them to do? Like you've not given them context. You've not given them the if they don't have insight into the strategy moving forward, and you're telling them what to say, you've not provided context. You've not made a connection with them to say, this is your role in the thing that we're trying to do. And this is the role that your people will play. This is how you get your people on board. I can't imagine how you would expect them to do a good job if you haven't given them anything.
They just end up feeling like they're drowning or like they're totally unsure what to do and
Exactly,
confused
because they
and
haven't gotten the
yeah.
direction and they haven't gotten the support. And I think a lot of, especially if you don't have a communications and or a change person built into your organization, there's this over reliance on just send an email because and use the word they very loosely. The idea is that as long as it gets sent out, the job is done. But we are trained as communications and or change professionals to do things in a way that there's a process and a structure and a system to get people to kind of move the needle on changing behavior. And you can't just change behavior with one instance of a thing.
Yeah. For me, behavior change really comes from like internal motivation and how I am trained to promote motivation is really through values
Mhm.
again, helping people connect with what is important to them and then make choices to act or behave in certain ways that are consistent with those values. So, do you have thoughts about how organizations can be, I guess, connecting with those intimate values of their employees? And I'm particularly thinking of the larger organizations that might really struggle to do
Yeah.
this. Like, how do you scale that kind of connection, like values based connection?
I think it's in the day-to-day culture building activities, those touch points along the employee journey where the values are woven into the day-to-day touch points. So when you start talking about change now, people should already be operating on an understanding of what the culture and the values are of the organization. That if a change is coming, you have to articulate what your values are in relation to the change. We're changing because we want to get better. We're changing because we want to improve. Like whatever your value proposition is as a company, your values, your mission, what you're in the thing to do. That change has to be in support of whatever the values are. And you have to be able or be willing, I should say. You should be willing to engage folks who have joined you on this journey to pursue the mission that you set out as a company, that whatever they saw in you as an organization, that they were willing to sit down through 3 rounds of interviews, read through an offer letter, negotiate the offer letter, agree to a start date, agree to compensation, come on board, drive from their house to your office, or walk up from their bedroom to the living room because that's the world we live in right now. And they're willing to commit time, effort in service of this mission to this is kind of what we're doing and bring them along for that journey. It's in the day-to-day touch points. It's not just going to happen because you decided to change it. You send an email because now you've not done a sufficient job connecting with them before you need them to do the thing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think I think one of the biggest challenges I see is when an organization's stated values go against the felt values of those changes that are made. Like I'm thinking of an organization that values ostensibly employee flexibility and autonomy and, promote some work from home time, and then decided that, having a flexible schedule or compressed schedule was no longer something they wanted to support. So they just removed it. And so employees were really left in the lurch, feeling like, well, these are the stated values. And then the action contradicts those values. And and for this particular organization I'm thinking of, they lost like 40% of their physicians, I think, as a
course it
result.
did.
And yeah. So like, I mean, how do you help leaders slow down and start to even recognize that values discrepancy when they're creating change like that?
Yeah. I have my suspicions that the decision to make that change was done very quickly and no notice was given, one, in a clear, consistent, concise way. It was done very abruptly.
You would be accurate.
I had a feeling. I had a feeling. If you're making changes that are that drastic from whatever the reason, and I can't imagine how you go from a willingness to be flexible to a hard and strong line in the sand and say, we're not going to be flexible. I can't. There are no scenarios that are automatically popping up in my head. I suspect there probably was a new leader in place that felt like they didn't want people to work from home or be flexible and they just wanted to change that. And that's a completely separate thing. But if you're doing something that is that drastic, that is going to be in conflict with what you've established as a value pillar for that organization, you have to communicate it early. You have to say, given leadership changes, given markets, it's whatever the prompt is, we are going to go in a different way as an organization. This is what this is going to look like. Give people an opportunity to see your perspective and decide for themselves whether they're going to stay because, where they see you want to go is someplace that they also want to go. Or they decide, what, this is no longer what I'm willing to exchange my time and effort for and want to go do something else. If you force it on them, I'm not surprised that 40 people decide, like, deuces, I'm out. You didn't really give them a choice. It was really take it or leave it, and they chose to leave it.
Yeah. I love that that solution offers so much autonomy and respect for the person's ability to make a choice. And I also recognize sometimes, healthcare organizations have to make changes, and maybe they're changes that are coming down from,
Right.
a country's policy. Like there's all
Exactly.
kinds of reasons that we might have to do something that feels bad. But recognizing people have a choice to stay or to go, and that they need to be able to have the time
Right?
to think this change through and make a decision about whether they want it to impact them or not, or whether they're willing to stick it out or not.
Exactly.
It seems like such a respectful way to go.
Yeah. And and here's the problem with it not being done more often is that it takes nothing off of the organization. It doesn't cost you money. It's literally already, if you're sending an email to say this change is happening, add another paragraph to give some context. It takes nothing off of you to provide insight into what the change is in sufficient enough time so people can make a decision for themselves and not feel like it's just being forced upon them. Because as human beings, we don't like to change. People are resistant to change. The minute you have to tell somebody you've got to do something different, they're like, hold on, wait, what? I'm not doing that. But if you give them the option to say, look, here are the things you can gain, here are the things you're going to lose. Are you willing to take, like Neo did, the red pill or blue pill? What are you willing to do? You invite them to participate in the change in a way that they can feel like their input makes sense rather than just telling them they have to do it. Like I said, it takes nothing off the organization to feed that into the messaging and the timeline. And it's disappointing when I see it happen so very often because I know it doesn't really take much not to have it done that way.
Yeah, I wonder, or one of my guesses is that within healthcare, like you said earlier, it's life or death scenarios.
Mhm.
And so I think that sometimes healthcare leaders can get caught up in an urgency that's not necessarily reality based for some decisions and some changes. Like whether your staff has a flexible schedule or not, that's not life or death. Like that might impact your hospital operations,
Mhm.
but from my perspective, the urgency doesn't necessarily need to be there. Maybe it's a values based decision and you have to go that direction or you choose to for good reasons. But being willing to slow down, think about it, and really communicate it to get people on board, I mean, it probably will take time, but I think that kind of pushes against this internal urgency that I sometimes see people experience. And so they just sort of jump the gun because they want to get to the end result, but the damage is just so significant, along the
Yeah.
way.
And outside of crisis communication, which is like an act of God or some sort of bit of terrorist attack where you've got like actual crisis, like you said, just take a second, take a pause. Let's think through how we're going to roll this out or implement this change and create a plan around the implementation or the rollout of the change. Like it does not need to be we're turning this off on Monday and you send the email at 5 o'clock on a Friday. Like, no.
Yeah. So what final tips, maybe two or three tips, do you have for healthcare leaders who are trying to improve how they communicate and how they communicate in that day-to-day way with their frontline employees?
Oh, final tips. Okay, let's see. Say if you don't have a comms person on your team, call me. Or
Absolutely.
get a comms person on your team. Comms and or change management. Because I think we're in an environment, and I'm seeing this happen from tech layoffs to acquisitions to risk, like it's rampant. Organizations are going through a lot of change. And it's traumatic the way that I'm seeing it happen. And if you don't have people in place to kind of stabilize, probably a very bad word to use, but help navigate that a little better, you're going to see the impacts in the long run. So that's the first thing. Get a comms person in place or a comms and change person. Secondly, once they're in place, listen to them. Please listen to the person that you hired. You hired them for a reason. Secondly, understand that not everything needs to be said all at once. Three C's that I tend to focus on when I write any message or I have any kind of communication. It is clear, it is concise, and it is consistent. Write everything you want to say down and edit heavily. Get to the point and get there quickly. What it is, what do you want them to do, and a closing. You don't need to go tangential and have like a page and a half. No one has the attention span to read that. And then I think number four would be focus on the two-way communication and do that kind of in tandem with the clear, concise, consistent, right? Figure out what your channels look like. One, like how you get in front of your people, like your website, your newsletter is the how. I think people tend to often conflate the website and the newsletter with the what. Instead, it's the how, it's the channel, it's the vehicle which the thing that you want to say gets delivered. Identify what your comms channels look like. How are your people getting messages? What do they have access to? What do they not have access to? And then listen to your comms person. That's number five. I'm going to repeat number. Please listen to your comms people. I cannot tell you how many meetings I've sat in, either as a person who's leading the effort or somebody who's supporting, where we've given recommendations only to be told, "No, we don't really feel like doing that." And then 2 weeks later, it's like, "Oh my god, we need the thing that you mentioned 2 weeks ago. Can you give that to us in 30 minutes?" Yeah, so those are my
Oh,
tips.
well, those are awesome tips. I'm gonna make mental notes and then just keep re-listening to our conversation. So my last question for you is just what keeps you connected to joy in your life and helps you engage in this work in a way that's
Oh
meaningful?
my goodness, that changes on a day-to-day basis because 'cause I'm in a period of transition and change now where I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, the problems that I wanna solve look a little differently, and do I still wanna solve those problems because it looks so differently? And it's the thing that I keep, like, bookmarking. Anytime I see an article on employee engagement or employee experience, I keep bookmarking it, and I keep going back to the trends, and you see what's going on at Twitter, and I can feel the angst of people every time I open my LinkedIn and, like, I just got laid off from Twitter or I just got laid off from Meta, and it's in the atmosphere that the experience that people are having at work, for the people that have left and the people that are staying is not good. And I mean, we're leading into recession, and we all, like, those of us who are fortunate to still have jobs, still have to get them and go to work, but you can feel it in the air. And what brings me joy to continue to do this work for the time being right now, as I'm in the south of France, are the croissants that I have in the morning.
I love it.
But from a day-to-day grounding perspective, I think it's because it's the thing that I keep coming back to all the time, that I know it can be better. I know that it can be done in a way that it's harsh, but it doesn't have to be as harsh. And I want to figure out my place in the world to contribute to making it better. I think that's what I don't. The croissants give me joy, but that gives me content. That makes sense. The croissants bread makes me very happy, and French do bread very well.
You are in the right place.
They do bread
Oh,
very, very well.
wow. Well, I really appreciate you
Yeah.
sharing all of that, Carly. And just want to remind folks that people can find you at the CarTam Project, and I'll link how they can connect with
Yes.
you in the show notes.
Mhm.
All right. Well, thank
Thank
you
you so
so
much for
much for
having me.
joining
This
me
was a
today on
wonderful
this.
conversation. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.